So in the course of completing an incident investigation, what I want you to think about is not shortcutting the process. There may be times where some go quicker than others. The trick here is to really do a quality investigation where we actually learn something from it. Okay? And I understand that in your organization you're doing an awful lot to kind of move the safety culture forward.
Yeah. And that's be coming down shortly, man.
Okay, very good. And Fred has returned. You loved the first presentation so much you wanted to come back. Good. Okay, thank you. Very good. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into this. And ask questions along the way. Make comments if you think they're appropriate. Just a very high-level look at auto warehousing, and this is really looking at the Illinois operation. So this is a combination of both Chicago and Normal. And what's highlighted are really kind of the key things, and really the bottom two sections there were sprains and strains representing a significant portion of not only the number of incidents that occur, but from a cost standpoint. You know, in terms of cost, think about all that money that we could reclaim and be able to put that back into the organization in a different fashion. How much we could do with that. Okay. So the next slide kind of takes all this information and puts it into something a little bit more palatable here. Sprains and strains being the top loss areas, combined total, significant amount, but also recognize this is a snapshot in time. This goes back to 2002. 48% of the frequency, 48% of the cost. And probably no surprises when you look at the types of tasks that are being done in the areas where they're occurring. You know, this time of year, we got this early snowfall, which we're all really excited about, right? So we have to contend with slippery surfaces. We've got to make sure that people have a firm footing. People working on the rail cars, getting in and out of the vans, putting those bridge plates in place, trying to avoid awkward posturing as much as we can, so squaring up when you need to do so to perform some of the tasks. So getting in and out of the car, parking lot, and rail cars, and then contusions, which tend to be, maybe a high frequency, but they tend to be a lower severity. Slips and falls, walking on ramps. These happen when we try to break falls and things like that. Okay, so high level. What do you think about this? Wise man once said, "A fool is not a man who makes no mistakes, we all do. A fool is a man who refuses to learn from them." So the idea of doing the investigation is learning from it. What's the definition of insanity?
Repetitive. Can you do the same thing, expect a different result?
Right, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And boy, do we do that enough in other parts of our life. Okay. All right, so our key objectives today. Let's take a look at the importance of doing these investigations and why multiple root causation analysis is critical. Looking at those elements of the investigation that help not only gather the facts that are pertinent, but it helps us to identify and correct the root causes of our incidents. Looking at the process, a good approach to kind of dissecting how to do it, and then looking at root cause analysis a little bit more in detail. So this is just very high level in the world of safety when we think about the types of incidents and the frequency of things that occur. The near misses at the bottom, I understand you are starting to take a look at near misses and hopefully trying to catalog some of those things. It's very important. When you think about injuries and accidents, you kind of wonder, well, how did that happen? How many times can we get away with something? Speeding on the road. Come on, we all do it, right? Okay. How many times could we get away with it without being caught or without being in an accident? By and large, we can do it quite a few times before it gets us in trouble. So what we need to do is to try to focus on the lower part of this diagram here, this triangle. So if we do that, we focus on the foundation. You don't put yourself up into that upper top of the pyramid where we're having our serious accidents and lost time incidents. Does that kind of make sense to you? Okay. You know, we hear about these fatals that happen, and you're like, well, how did that happen? Well, when you go back and you kind of dig deeper into it, there might be some occasions where we've done some things, and we've gotten away with it for quite a while. Okay. So, the values of doing the investigation. Ideally, preventing or similar incidents. Help us to get better at identifying why we have some of our problems and looking at our methods, the production conditions, what can we do to improve that. It might unearth a real training need, something that we haven't considered that we maybe have assumed people knew how to do. Maybe it's a brand new to the operation and we need to take a closer look at it. It does show management concern, which I think goes a long way to hopefully boosting morale in the operation. It makes us knowledgeable, and it can be used in many cases as an evaluation tool for supervisors, quite honest. You know, how well did we do at kind of managing the process, the quality of our investigations. Other things to consider, it's really the right thing to do. It's a moral obligation too, protecting our people, our property, our communities. A key thing from a safety nerd standpoint is it's the data. You know, it helps us identify potential trends, things that we should be focusing on, identifying our deficiencies, and should help kind of engage people, kind of stimulate their interest in safety. So it's meant to be taken seriously, at the same time engaging the people who are involved in the process, which could be the injured person, their party. So to do this, it is, from a best practice standpoint, suggested that we investigate all injuries, and I think that's what you folks do here, correct? Okay. The timeliness of the investigation, I think, is very important. Trying to get out there immediately and go to the scene. Now, why do you think that's important?
Well, it might change.
Correct.
We had a slide over here the other day, and if I didn't take pictures right away, it might not have been as slippery and icy, wet.
Okay.
So I had to get pictures as soon as possible.
Very good. You're right. Before conditions change, before stories change, and we'll kind of get into that in the next couple of slides there. So think about, too, who needs to be involved in the investigation. And that's going to be predicated on the type of injury or incident that occurs. You know, it might require you to call somebody else to say, hey, can you help me out with this? I have a few questions. Need to look into some documentation. So operations, getting them involved, and using the forms that you have available to you. So you have what, the form 600, right?
601.
601, you've got the employee statement, you've got witness statement forms, which should help guide you through the process. And if you have questions about those forms, let us know too. Okay. So what do we need to look at? You know, the physical environment, the person, the timing when things had occurred, and how people are performing the task at hand. So the physical's typically pretty easy. This is the stuff that you guys probably key into right away. You know, what were they working with, materials, hand tools in many cases, perhaps power tools if they were doing accessorizing in other parts of the organization. Is the equipment being properly maintained? So do we have an inspection process? Were we following it? Did we get behind on it? Taking that into account, looking at how things are positioned. Is everything in its right place at the right time? Even from a person standpoint, the body positioning. Okay, so taking that into account, making sure that things were readily available. Many times, oh yeah, we've got all this great stuff. Well, where is it? You know, well, it's 100 yards down the way, and I don't have time to go get it. That could be one of the things that comes out of it. And then looking at the proper material handling aspects. Okay. Other things, considering the location and the environment. You guys work primarily outside, right?
Yeah.
Or inside, if it's a rail operation or within the vehicle itself. And you might not think it means anything, but you know, getting the facts, documenting it, and then seeing if indeed it has a bearing on what we could do differently. Lighting. I understand you've done an awful lot with lighting here of late, adding additional lighting in the yard, especially over here. I have not had a chance to see it forward, so excuse me, can't speak to that operation as well. The floor surfaces, in your case, the parking lot surfaces. I understand that you have some better markers on the ground to be able to locate things. And I had asked the question at lunch. I said, well, what do you do in the snow? I said, well, apparently they're back far enough so that they can plow, and you'll still be able to see those plates, I guess, that they put down there. So the check is going to be for you to monitor that and see if indeed that's the case. If it's not, then certainly let the management team know what we could do differently. Okay. So any other physical changes? The person, very critical part here. The injured person or persons. Did we place that person properly? And here it comes down to, we were talking about vehicle safety. You know, I think we take for granted that people know how to drive. You've got a driver's license that allows you to get in a vehicle and go. What did we do from a training standpoint? You know, to better educate them. You don't know necessarily, perhaps, that, you know, maybe they're prone to speeding or doing something else. That part of this goes back to the hiring process and the HR arena. Did we give them proper instructions? Now, how might you gauge that, whether we gave them proper instructions? What would you look for?
Clear, precise.
You're going to look at maybe some of their documentation, training. Yeah, looking at the training records. You know, ask them some questions about that. The experience level. As a supervisor, knowing your crew, knowing your team. You probably, you know, everybody's got a little different demeanor, but you can also tell probably if somebody's not feeling quite right, you know, what's going on even outside of work. You know, you can kind of gauge some of those things, help keep people on point when they're at work. So in the investigation, kind of looking for those types of things. Strength, flexibility, you know, we're all getting younger, right? I wish it were true. Someday it'll happen. Making sure people can, you know, do the types of things that you need to do. I understand there's an awful lot of bending and stooping that goes on as far as chalking and setting things in place. The emotional state and the attitude, and then this last component, you know, fatigue. We've all experienced it, I think, from one time or another. Working the night shift is not necessarily the most glamorous thing. Okay, people can do it, but they have to go about it the right way. Okay, so keeping that in mind, how have we had this person working? Did they take their rest breaks? Things of that nature. Other things that might come into play, the time of shift. So how far into the shift were we? Was this the beginning of the shift, after the shift? Who else was involved? Anything unusual about the job conditions? So making note of that, which at the time might not mean anything right away, but again, you're in this fact-finding phase. And then time as it relates to a lot of different things. Okay, you know, if somebody's taking medication for, you know, an illness, how long? When did they, you know, take the medication? What effect it might have on them? You know, that might be a bearing. So consider time, relevance to that. Time changes. Interesting when things happen. Okay, and the methods. This to me is very critical. What do you have to look at to tell whether a person might be doing the job as it's designed? I had heard this morning that we have like job hazard analyses. Do you guys have access to that? Job instructions, anything that you would pull from a database, okay? That might be something to kind of dust off, take a look at, and see what your opportunities are for maybe fine-tuning those. or looking at them for what they are right now and say, find out, did the person take a shortcut? And if so, try to figure out why. So a 7-step process. We go to the incident scene. We've got to manage that scene. When something happens, we're going to look at the gathering facts. We're going to do some interviews when the incident warrants it. We'll look at documenting the sequence of events, and then you get into this root cause determination and planning for corrective actions and completing the form. So for managing the scene, although this might seem silly, the first step is to really, let's take care of the individual. You're not tripping over the body to get to, hey, what happened? Take care and treatment of the injured person, sending them to the occupational health clinic, whatever's going to be critical for that situation. And you have to kind of guard the scene, if you will, eliminate any remaining hazards that might be there. So common things, in a office setting would be, putting out the wet floor sign until somebody can come and clean it up. So for you folks, it might be maybe you need somebody to kind of guard an area before we take care of maybe a down power line or something that fell in the yard. All right. Once you do that, then you preserve and secure the scene of the incident. So maintaining the site as it was at the time of the incident, which we heard earlier, very critical. The conditions can change rather rapidly. You're going to secure it. Now, how many of you actually take out a sheet of paper, whether it's the accident report form or just a blank form, and try to diagram out the scene?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, excellent. And if you haven't done so already, the idea of using the photographs, I don't know. I know you guys have policies against using cell phones on the clock and things like that, except on your breaks, but having a photograph or videotape in some cases can be very helpful as well. So finding out where you can locate that camera. And is there any other critical evidence that needs to be preserved? And this could be more of like a third-party situation. It involves another vendor, contractor who might be on site. The idea here is that you're preserving the evidence, it doesn't get destroyed. You never know when this little strip that you found on the pavement could be really crucial to help in the claim process. So consider possible third-party involvement. So gathering the facts, who needs to be involved, and how the investigation should be done. You could require some additional expertise, which might be things like reaching out to people like Kevin or Mike or others within your respective terminals. Get them involved in the process. Use your accident incident report forms as a guide. Okay, following that process, taking photographs, and use the word here, measurements. In situations, tape measures. What's the distance between point A to point B? Light meters, slip meters. You're not going to have access to all these different things, but probably more crucial for you are going to be things like maybe a tape measure. Other documents could be, what is our policy as it relates to X? So being able to go into your own database, finding that information, looking at inspection logs, looking at training logs, and maybe it's consulting the safety department for things as it relates to safety compliance. What do the standards and regulations say about this? Do we have something in place? So look at similar operations in the area. The idea is sharing between locations. I'd love to see more organizations get better at doing that, and I think from what I've heard from Kevin, that's happening. Okay. Above all, avoid the preconceived notions. So what happens when you hear about an incident? You guys get all excited about it? Go, oh no, right? What goes through your mind? Not again, right? You might get some of those things.
Is it OSHA recordable?
Is it OSHA recordable? Okay. You're already thinking down that road, okay? Because why do you think that?
Because for everybody in this room, one of our incentives is geared towards our safety goals.
Okay.
So, you know, in the long part of the vision of it, I think we're all kind of looking at it as, is this something that, you know, is going to escalate past the initial accident investigation? What are we going to do to keep it from happening again? How do we move forward from this situation?
Okay, okay. And don't get so trapped by the incentive portion of it. You know, what happens, happens.
We're here to make money.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, you know, it could be something that you don't have as much control over as you do. But avoiding preconceived notions, take a look at this. Okay. How many F's do we have in the statement here? Who wants to venture a guess? And Kevin, you can't say.
I only see two.
Okay, so we got 2,
Four.
2, 4, 5,
It's like David
We got 4. 6.
6.
Yeah,
All right, there's 6. Who said that? Good job. Okay. So it's a little hard to see here, but I've kind of tried to capitalize a little bit.
Go back one. Those odds weren't in there.
What throws you off are probably the of. And there's been other studies that you see some text, and those of you who are text monsters, you know, who do this on a routine basis, and you learn how to do shorthand, people can read that. Your brain automatically kind of sifts through all that stuff. So be careful though sometimes. You might miss something if you don't take a closer look at it. That's what we're trying to say here. Okay? So the interview process, looking at who was involved, who was injured, who else could have been involved. If you're working as a team, you know, hopefully there is somebody else who can kind of confirm for accuracy what took place. You know, what did somebody see or hear? It could be somebody who was nearby doing something, heard it, try to get their take on what the experience was. Somebody working with this person at the time or just before. So here's where we kind of get into this. Think about the timeline. What preceded the incident? What led up to this unfortunate event? Okay. Who had trained and supervised the particular individual, who responded to the incident, and who can help prevent the reoccurrence. You know, is it somebody directly within the operation, or do we need to go for additional guidance from corporate or from other safety professionals, you know, who can help speak to this? Maintenance, housekeeping, you know, what are the critical people that you have in your organization you need to speak with? Why do you think I might have put down purchasing on there?
Buying the right stuff.
Buying the right stuff, exactly. You know, sometimes it's not just pulling out the Grainger catalog and buying the first item that's in there.
Yeah, you don't want to hammer a nail with a wrench.
Yeah. You know, silly things happen sometimes, but try to find out who gets involved in that process. So when you conduct the interview, you want to do it as soon after the incident as possible. Again, taking care of the medical care that could be that may need to be taken. Interview in private to avoid group bias. Right? Go ahead.
I think that is one of the biggest challenges for everybody in this room. And what I mean by that is there is a brotherhood, you know, 710. So even if we know that there was no way for us, let me speak on the Ford side. So give you an example. We run in strings of 7 cars.
Okay.
So if the middle car was in an accident, there's no way that neither one of the first 3 cars or the back 3 cars saw anything that was happening. But
Unless
when
it was on a curve or something, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to go and ask, well, hey, what did you see? There is a Chinese wall or a code of silence amongst the other members. So what kind of coaching or motivation in your experience, have you seen that work successful in those types of environments to get people to say, well, hey, you know, I actually did see this? Because I think we've tried all of the different, you know, different strategies to do it, from trying to say, well, hey, you know, you might want this guy to look out for you one time, you know, maybe even kind of like a guilt trip. Or I know somebody saw it, I'm sitting here looking at the camera footage and I see all of you guys right there in line with him. How did you not see anything? So from guilt trip to hard nosed, good cop, bad cop, there is a code of silence that says, well, I didn't see nothing.
I think it goes to the point that's on there, so it's not, you know, it's not the fault finding. It's not a blame game, and I think people have to understand that. And I think management has to be forthright and fully believe that that's their approach.
But that goes a long way towards what we do about it.
Yeah, not fault finding. I'm just saying, even seeing it, they'll flat out tell me, like, hey, on the side, they'll say, this guy fell asleep, ran into a guardrail. I'm not putting nothing on paper. I didn't see nothing.
So
Right.
the witness
They don't want to
statements
be
is what they don't
involved.
want to complain.
Right, and they can get together by
Yeah.
the time we get there and formulate some kind
Right,
of
you're
other.
you're kind of in collusion, and they kind of change the story on you. I think they need to understand that in order to get better, in order to move forward with the safety and take care of each other. Yeah, not everybody's looking out for each other. I know that.
See, we're
But
in that weird.
the idea is, in order to correct this and make sure it doesn't happen again, if we possibly can, we need all the little bits of information, because that might be something that's crucial to help us determine what needs to be done
But
next.
see, these guys don't, and I know it's a tough thing to do. They don't see
Yeah.
it that way. Our senior guys have been with the last 6 companies. While management goes, they stay. So they don't care about correcting, you know, for hey, we're a company team. No, they're a
Yeah.
union team.
Right, they're
And then
them.
struggle.
But I
before
think
they're
as a
us.
union, though, for the unions that I have worked with, you know, the union's not going to argue with safety. You know, they're looking out for their members.
Have you
Health
dealt
and
with
safety of the
Teamsters?
members.
Right.
Yes, I have.
It's
Yeah.
tough.
It's
Yes,
tough.
I have. I've
Yeah.
worked with Big Brown for
In
about
Chicago.
20 years, so in Chicago. And honestly, in working with them, it was at the time that they were bringing on board their safety and health process. And so there were some stick in the muds. You know, I'm not going to lie to you. But I think as an organization, to watch them grow, and I've been away from it for a couple of years, there's a lot of good stuff that's going on. So it can be done. It's all in how we approach people and speak with people, and helping them to understand that we mean business, that we really do want to try to resolve this issue if we possibly can. We're not placing blame on anybody. You got to tell us. So if there's some issues out there, let us know. You know, we're not out to get anybody in trouble.
Well, not hearing about issues, that's no problem.
Yeah.
We'll hear about issues all day.
Yeah, but I hear you. I know it's rather difficult, but even on your forums, I think there's a place for you as a supervisor to kind of state, you know, some of your own opinions and,
Well, I kind of
you know, kind of take some of that information.
I kind of took the approach where the falling asleep at the wheel story. I'm telling the other guys, okay, you want to clam up, but do you really want this guy
Yeah.
who could fall asleep in the middle of driving in a string of cars with you in front and behind him? You know, like, do you want to be in the environment with that? You know I wouldn't want to ride that bus.
Agreed. Agreed.
And still no statements.
And I think that I think that we've all kind of gone down that same road as Alan is talking about. And I guess what I'm asking you in reference to that is to say, okay, so that we don't have to go all the way down to the level of using intimidation factors.
And I wouldn't even go there. Yeah, I don't think it's worth going that route.
No, I wasn't saying
Yeah.
that.
No,
I was
what-
just trying,
Yeah.
more like coercion.
Oh, well, and that's what
intimidation.
I mean, the same scenario with us. I'm sitting here watching it on the computer
Yeah.
because we have the video feed and I have the whole bus surrounding me. And I'm saying, okay, now I see all 7 cars right here. How did nobody see anything? You know, but at that point, it's to the point to say, well, okay, you know, well, I don't really want to say anything because if I say that I wasn't looking and the accident happened right in front of me, then that's a work violation because I'm distracted and not paying attention to what I'm doing. You see, so it's kind of one of those things. But if you come with a soft sell and say, well, hey, can anybody help me put the pieces together?
Yes. I
Be as
think
quiet as this room is.
Yeah. I think all you can do is kind of keep pushing the boundary, keep asking, and eventually I think somebody's going to speak up.
If we were in this boat where our company went, everybody went, then I think we would have more team players. And, you know, it's tough, so it's hard to do.
It's a slow process, but you know, it doesn't hurt to ask. Honestly, I think that's really what you're trying to do. You're
It's
trying to
funny.
get all sides.
It's funny you said that. And so recently, and I won't give any names, but there was an incident in one of our yards, and one of the most senior men that I'm pretty close with said, "Let me call the union president and see if I should give my statement or not, because I don't want to be labeled a rat." Didn't give a statement. Can't. So I mean, that's what we deal with.
It's
just
unfortunate.
different.
That's what I would say. It's unfortunate.
It's
And I think
tough.
they need to understand that it's, you know, ideally I think you're supposed to be looking out for your fellow members. You know,
Well, I
I
mean-
think it boils down to that. The
Well-
other thing too is, you know, purely from a compliance standpoint, you know, you look at the OSHA standard, and yes, the employer does have the obligation to provide a safe place to work. The flip side of that is, you know, the employees have the obligation to follow, you know, safety policies and procedures, and you know, be an active participant, I guess you will. I'd have to say. So all I can say is kind of keep after it, but help them to understand we're not out to place blame. We're not
No,
putting
not at all.
anybody's job in jeopardy.
And I guess the whole point of this is saying it's a little difficult for us sometimes to put the scenario back together when
Yeah.
nobody saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
But
we
you can
don't
ask
do
them,
that.
so, you know, even if it doesn't get committed to paper, say, all right, I understand your position. Based on what maybe you didn't see, what do you think we could do differently? So to that point there about requesting ideas for prevention, I think that's a critical piece. And I don't know if your form lends itself to doing that, but I think that's crucial for, you know, whoever was involved, because I'm a firm believer in getting the people closest to the risk involved in helping to modify, improve, correct any, you know, processes that we have.
I do want to make it clear that we don't do that. We don't say, okay, we want to blame you for this. We just want the right answers so we know how to go forward and what to do about it. Because if somebody really screwed up and did, like say they're on a cell phone and they get into an accident, then we need to address that, and we need to know that that's what happened. You know, but we're not getting those answers, and being impossible for us to be everywhere at once, we can't see that stuff. I've never seen an accident. And I mean, I get called and it takes me a good 10, 15, 20 minutes to get there.
Sure.
So we just want the right answers. We don't want to put fault on people.
Does the associate fill out their form?
Yes.
Do they usually ask for assistance to fill it out?
No. I mean, it's pretty
Wouldn't
self-explanatory.
you, if you were a brother, want to support somebody with supporting document that I seen it and here's what happened? And that's my message to anybody I've ever talked to, and I find that there's more and more witness statements coming forward because you talked about it as a brotherhood. We're going to stick together. In no ways someone's going to break that wall down. But the reality is a witness statement could support that associate statement. And if they look at it as if I'm supporting you, brother, then it solidifies the brotherhood, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And sometimes,
Only
So-
time I don't. Actually, the only time I don't see that is when there's more than one party involved, and that other person can possibly be at fault. And the same brotherhood is just like, what kind of relationship do I have with this guy versus that guy? You know, it's usually that situation that we run into, that gray area.
it's a difficult one, but out of the witness statements, if it collaborates or goes against, it still adds to a better investigation.
Right.
It gets to the root, and 6 senior men don't want to see that happen because there's going to be another change of management.
Yeah.
I can only suggest as supervisors to go out in the world and say it's a supporting document.
Yeah, definitely.
What is the threshold for witness statements? Because I realize that we are not supposed to coach, and from what I understand, basically you want to try and get the witness statement done as soon as possible after the incident so that everything is still fresh in everybody's mind, so on and so forth. So I know me and my staff, the average statement, whether it's the associate or whether it's the witness, is the vaguest, most inappropriately worded situation that you would ever try to even consider finding
No
facts out of.
detail either.
Okay, here we go. Let's move on to the next couple of slides because that might help you. there.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
So, and again, requesting prevention ideas. I think that's I can't stress that one enough. Again, keeping those preconceived notions to the side. Don't jump to conclusions right away and make your recommendations too quickly. I think is critical. So in the interview, asking them, to put things in their own words, but at the same time, thinking about asking open-ended questions. So what is an open-ended question?
Let them give a response.
Keep
More
going.
than a yes or no.
More than a yes or no. So, think about how you're going to frame these without leading them down this rosy path to what you think actually happened. Getting them to tell their own story. Now, you're probably aware of people who are prone to overstating things, kind of making a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak. And you're going to have others that understate it, and don't kind of go far enough to, paint the picture, so to speak. So simple approaches, consider the who, what, where, when, why, and how. You've got to get the facts, and you've got to be able to listen. Listening is a very hard skill for people to do correctly. I struggle with it. That's probably one of my weaknesses, to be quite honest. But listening, testing the information. So you're getting facts over here, you're getting little tidbits here, 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 and here. You've got to collectively look at that and determine whether or not that kind of leads up to possibly what could have happened. So testing the evidence, is it valid? Repeat the story back. So what you're hearing from the individual, from the witnesses, kind of mimic that, kind of make sure that you understand that. Probe for all aspects of the incident, get all sides. What else can you tell me that might have been a factor? So the idea of the cooperation and not the intimidation. So, not standing nose to nose with somebody and say, tell me. Give them a little bit of personal space.
Well, I do see the private investigator part of it, because this incident we had, the driver said she slid into the barricade. She was turning this way, slid here. If she was sliding, she would have slid that way. So her story didn't jive, you know what I'm saying? So she's turning right and hit the barricade on her right. If she slid, she would hit the barricade on her left. So if you do a little of your own investigating or thinking
knowing
about
as a front wheel drive, rear wheel drive,
right, and then you could avoid that smoke screen if you just use your head a little bit.
And here's where you've got the diagrams, you've got maybe skid
Right,
marks, you've
right.
got other things that might
Right.
tell you what had happened.
Right.
If you ever watch the crash investigators, it's a very arduous process that they go through to determine some of the big nasty types of incidents.
Right,
that we
and
see
there
on
was
the
mud
roads.
there, and those wheels went straight into that, so there was no sliding at
So
all.
that helps you, and that you're not being confrontational. Let the facts speak for themselves.
Right.
I think is part of it too.
So, what's the reality of the room? When is this happening? I mean, because for us, and we're being candid, so for us,
Understood.
this is happening at the accident right as soon as the first supervisor gets there. So, a lot of times, considering the environment, you got a lot of adrenaline going.
Sure.
Depending on what kind of accident, it's
Yeah.
cold or wet or slick or dark or something.
Bring them into an area that's more conducive, perhaps, to getting the information after you've looked at the scene and done the things that you need to do.
See, I think that's the part.
Give them a cup of coffee.
We're
I
not
don't
doing.
care.
We're trying to do it right there.
Yeah,
And that's,
if it's possible to do that. Again, I know we've got production issues, but do what makes the most
You
sense.
see, a lot of our issues are okay. You have an incident, an accident.
Mhm.
It's in the way of our production.
Yeah, that last one definitely.
And
You know what? You don't have time to
Here's the
leave
thing:
it and-
safety and production go hand in hand. So yes, does it take time to do an investigation? You bet. We hate to do them because it takes time away. So here's your
No, I mean, sometimes
motivation to
physically in the way.
No.
keep
yeah.
trying to prevent these. Yeah.
This last incident that I had, it was right after a really sharp turn. If I didn't tell her to move that van, people would have
That's
came around
fine.
the corner and smacked right into
That's
it.
part of the hazard control,
Right.
managing the scene. So where it makes sense, move them off to the side. And you'll see police do that on the road as well. Hey, I
Sure.
need to move you off over here
Sure, would have a
because you're
parking
impeding
right away.
traffic, and it makes more sense to move you off.
And I will say our terminal manager and our day shift operations supervisor are pretty honest about get those quick couple pictures right away so you don't forget. So
Right. Well, like I
Yeah.
was saying, if the sun would have hit that patch of ice half hour later, it wouldn't have been a patch of ice anymore.
Exactly.
But I think this part of the process has got to come earlier in our process because this interview for us isn't happening until so the accident happens. We bring the person back, give us your statement, or write the statement on the way to the clinic.
Right.
Come back, send them home. Jeff reads it, and then he calls them back in, and that's when this interview is happening. Tell me what happened. Your story doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? So maybe we need to take the interview process part of it and bring that up to the front. You know what I'm saying? Maybe have an initial interview right then versus, hey, write your statement and go on and go. Because, you know, we're, you see what I mean?
I
In
do.
an environment
Yeah.
that can be controlled.
We
Yeah, they
could
write their
really do
statement.
Jeff.
They write their statement, and then after they're done with their statement, they go into Jeff's office
Jeff
and they write a
takes it.
diagram.
Okay.
They draw it all out and see exactly what happened. And then from that point on, we take them to get a drug screen.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we got Jeff on the
You
side.
got that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, think about the process. What makes most sense to get the information that you need.
But no, you're right. I think sometimes we do need to just slow down. And take
Yeah,
a breath.
because I think we're
I
trying
think
to get
you're
back
right.
to the
Yeah, you
operation.
feel the pressure of I
We do.
got to get this done. Now,
do.
and you know, and from a fact-finding standpoint, yes, there's some initial stuff that you need to get collected to get the claim moving forward. And I know our partners from Brown and Brown aren't here at the moment, but they would also echo that because they need that information. Liberty Mutual needs that information to kind of make sure that we get this going so that the person's getting the right quality of care, we get the right information.
Right.
Even in a vehicle, you know, you need the VIN numbers and things like that. So we can,
How would you
we can do
suggest,
that.
and I know night shift probably feels the same way because they get a little bit, usually higher numbers than we do. So what happens is either a bus driver or a shuttle driver gets in the accident.
Mhm.
Well, you can't grab everyone for their statements right there because, you know what, we take away a bus from a pad for 20 minutes.
No, but you can probably write down who was involved, you know, who
Well,
was on the bus.
we
or
do,
who-
we
who
do,
may
but
have
you
been
know what,
involved.
you come back to them an hour and a half, 2 hours later when they're on break, they've all had time
To collaborate.
to collaborate or say I didn't see nothing. It's just, it's one of those situations where,
Yeah.
Push and pull.
you know,
Yeah.
it's, we grab the one person and try to keep the rest of them moving. And so we really don't slow down like we should, you know?
Yeah.
But we can.
I don't know how you would suggest handling that. Like give them a sheet of paper on the bus and say, fill it out and turn it into me when you can.
They'll collaborate on that too.
Or,
That's something.
hey, call, you know, can you call me?
And they don't want to call because they're on the bus with the other people.
Yeah.
You
Or
got
when
to
they get
get
on, yeah.
involved.
You got
Yeah, I
the group
know.
this session that
Yeah.
does most of the accident investigations. So that's
Uh-oh.
why you got so many questions.
So you can probably-
This is what we do.
Okay, I don't know, Kevin, if you want to add anything to that from the.
And that's just it. I mean,
being on a
what's the
van
best
or
way
a
to
bus.
get? We get nowhere. I mean, to put it bluntly, we get nowhere with nobody.
Start small, you know. look
Can you
very-
jump on with them?
Can we? And that's
Yeah.
even worse because none of them want to talk to us while the other ones are there.
Yeah.
And you know what? So now all of a sudden you're grabbing them, we're trying to separate them, give them their space, but the other ones see them going somewhere else, and they don't want to fill out the form. They don't want to do nothing. They didn't, you know. I mean, like Mr. Wilkins said, they could be right behind them.
Yeah.
I blinked that second. I didn't see nothing. And it's really it's frustrating, and you do get a little upset with it.
I think what could possibly help is when you have an investigation where everything goes right. Okay. In other words, we learn something from that.
Okay.
We find out some good corrective actions. We put corrective actions in place, and it affects and improves the process for everybody.
Right.
That to me is a win. So to communicate that back out to people, hey, we couldn't have done it without you. You know, try to get them involved in the process, engage them as best you can.
We do that
So,
too. There's
yeah.
always a corrective action every time something happens.
You know, being able to communicate that and say, you know, honestly, guys, I can't do it alone.
If we
You
can't
know,
get
I
it on
need that
paper-
information to help us get better at this.
If we can't get it on paper and they won't make an official statement, would you suggest that we still talk to them so that we can get
Oh,
our
sure.
procedures in line?
What do you
with-
do as a supervisor,
Right.
manager normally? You should be talking to your people.
Well, no, I mean
Yeah.
we talk to them, but you know what? I'm not getting anything from when it involves someone else's job security.
Yeah,
And I
and I
understand.
think that's the thing. If they think it's relevant to somebody's position and possibly losing.
Well, that's not
that.
me. That's the
That's
company.
that's the- that's. What
They've
they're
seen
thinking.
Well, would it be considered intimidating if we stress that they give us the right information versus what we're going to find out when we do the slip?
Well, I think it's, what we're trying to do is probe for all sides. We need your, what was your take on what happened? We'll take a look at it from all angles. We'd like you to contribute to the process. And maybe that's how you approach it.
Well, once we do an investigation, we're going to find out exactly what happened. So you should tell us.
Yeah, well, that to me sounds more like intimidation.
Well, that's what it is.
So I guess I'd be a little careful with
Say it out
that.
loud.
Yeah.
Don't you never say intimidation is a good thing?
I think you have to know your people and you've got to be careful.
I know my people, and I think
Yeah.
intimidation is
I can tell you I'm married to a blue-collar Joe, okay? So, you got to look at what makes people tick and how people respond. It's all about knowing your people, okay?
Sometimes we can't find out without the information.
Yeah.
One of our incidents was still a ghost truck.
Yeah.
A ghost truck that went in the wrong lane, and nobody would say otherwise.
I've heard the word ghost many times today since I've been here, so I think that I find that interesting. So, do what you can, take the notes, record the statements. I don't know if you have situations where having, a bilingual, interpreter is going to be necessary. I have that experience certainly in some of the
You
plans.
could speak English.
Get there. But, it's helping people, and maybe some people can't articulate as well what had happened as well, so kind of helping them through that process. Close the interview on a positive note. Again, it's not a beat-up session. It's, hey, we'll get back to you. And I think that's part of it, too. Some people feel as though this has fallen on deaf ears in the past, perhaps. And say, hey, I'll get back to you. I'll let you know one way or the other whether we can do this, whether it makes sense to do it, that kind of a thing. So people who think that maybe they've been burned in the past, might not want to contribute. So from a questioning technique, as far as not leading the witness, here's some just very sample examples of maybe a better way to do things, So, what direction was the employee running when he or she tripped on the stairs, as opposed to, hey, what was the employee doing just right before they fell? And here where somebody may say, oh, well, they were carrying a clipboard, they had something in their hands, they seemed to be looking off the other way, there was somebody who called them off over here. Some of that information might be helpful. What do you think caused the employee to fall? Is it a matter of just I tripped over there on 2 feet, or hey, I stubbed it on a piece of wood that happened to be on the ground that didn't quite make it into the trash can over here? Did you see the employee reach past a guard and stick their hand in the drive? Maybe not as appropriate for your operation, but you kind of get where I'm going here. Not leading them down that path. What did you see? What did the employee do? So the next step, looking at the sequence of events. Who did what? What happened before that? So again, thinking further upstream. What led us to this point where we had the unfortunate incident? Who was involved? When did things happen? So putting together kind of like a timeline where it makes sense to do so for maybe either bigger incidents. Why did it happen? And you get down to asking the why. So on your form, you have the section for 5 whys, right? Easy thing to fill out, correct? Sure. Didn't sound too convincing.
Yeah.
But I know it might be a little bit intimidating to people, but I want you to recognize that it's multiple causation. It's usually not just one thing or one factor that's present in all incidents. There's several different things that could have led up to this, contributed to it.
And I see what you were saying about the slide before, like don't ask them, hey, did you see him stick his hand into, because then you're making a judgment there.
Yeah.
And you don't want to do that.
Exactly. So let them paint the picture. Okay? So here's a picture of, this person is kind of in a steam cloud over here. So in this case, what happens to the employee? They're burned. Okay, they've got steam burns. Well, going further back, it was a steam line that burst. Why? We had excess pressure in the line. And we come to find out, asking another why, that the pressure relief valve was corroded shut. Didn't prevent that safe release of the excessive pressure. Well, why did that happen? Well, we found out that we weren't doing our regular inspections and that the valve test wasn't conducted. So doesn't this go a long way to kind of getting down to the root cause as to what happened? Right, exactly. So, and what happens in many cases, I would probably expect to see on some incident reports, because I look at, you know, a lot of them here and there from various organizations, is we might get down to, well, it was a steam line that burst. That was the, that's what happened. And then how are you going to correct that? Well, we'll repair the steam line. Well, really, is that the issue? So you got to think about digging deep enough. Okay, getting to the root cause. So root causes, you know, kind of a piece of the pie here. It's performance discrepancies. In other words, people probably know what they should be doing. Okay, we train people, so there shouldn't really be a knowledge gap there. And in many cases, people have the right equipment, or in most cases, I would say people have the right equipment. Here's another way to look at it. People don't have the tools that they need. You know, and as you get into the investigation, think about this. Did this person or persons have everything that they needed to do this job the way it's designed? Okay? Was it accessible? Was it in the right condition? From a skill set, you know, skills capabilities, people didn't know what to do, or I'll even add, or they didn't know why it's important that they do it in a certain fashion. So what are the consequences? If I don't follow this sequence, what can happen to me? And I think we can do that through the training piece of it, because it could be pretty critical. And then performance, people don't do what they need to do. Never happens, right? No, this happens all the time, and it happens off the job as well. Think of your own personal experiences. We all know we're supposed to be belted up when we're out on the highway. And yet we still see people who choose not to get on board with that. We know that the laws will be changing in January when it comes to things with, you know, vehicle distractions and cell phones. Okay? So be wary of it. People will be informed, they'll know what they do, but they choose to act in a manner that's not maybe appropriate. They take shortcuts. So when we look at corrective actions for equipment issues, we're typically looking at engineering solutions. For skills, training aspects, and then managing consequences for the performance. And how many incident report forms do you fill out where our corrective actions are, we need to retrain Joe in X? Do you have those?
Yeah.
Is that appropriate, though? Well, Joe probably knows how to do that. It's holding him accountable for doing it right the first time there. Okay. So managing the consequences is critical. Now, I am a gardener. I am an advocate for natural landscapes and native plants. And everybody, whether you are a gardener or not, has these lovely little dandelions in your yard, right? I don't see too many manicured yards that you can escape this. So what happens when you see the little yellow tops? What do? Hopefully you pull them out. A lot of people just kind of keep whacking them, right? Okay? You lop off the heads, what happens? It grows back with even more vigor, I think. Okay. So in using this analogy for root cause, the flower heads, if you will, really relate to our direct causes of the injury. So in our case, it's primarily strains and contusions that we're concerned about. That's what we see above the surface. And the leaves themselves, we can tug on the leaves and try to clean those off as well. But same thing, it's above the surface, we see it, but yet we don't go deep enough. So primary surface causes, looking at those that are directly related to the injury, what were the conditions and the behaviors at that time? What factors were controlled or uncontrolled? Was there a failure to perform safety practices or procedures? Who was involved? So the leaves you can't see as clear there, but you have things on there such as broken tools, defective personal protective equipment, lack of time, too much work, horseplay, and you have to define what horseplay is. Created a hazard, ignored a hazard, failed to report an injury, failed to inspect, failed to enforce, failed to train. Those are just kind of a myriad of different things that we would expect to find when we start looking into the root causes. And as the secondary surface causes, it's kind of, then you're getting into not only the what happened at the time of the injury, here's where you're kind of looking more upstream. What preceded the incident? And again, considering all the things that I mentioned before, but looking at others that could have been involved, you know, even from being honest with the supervision, you know, was there anything that could have been done differently or didn't take place? But getting down below the surface, there's some value in that. Trying to determine if maybe there's a change that has to take place, not only within your setting, but maybe it's something that could be applied universally in the organization. Do we have outdated programs? What is our inspection policy? Maybe we didn't have one for this particular type of equipment. Was our training plan adequate? Did we shortcut our orientation process? You know, those are the types of things. And it considers all causes. Okay? So digging deep, because in order to root out these dandelions, boy, you really got to go after them. And you leave that hole in the yard, and you got to fill it in. Okay, so fill it in behind. So the 5 whys, you have that on your form. It's meant to help you kind of visualize and gain knowledge about the organization. It's a cause and effect relationship. So what's the relationship between the facts and the possible causes? And it's really a brainstorming exercise. So the whole interview process and data gathering, when you look at this, and your form kind of lends itself, but there's a typical kind of a flow chart that you might see. As it says down below, this is what your children do, right? Those of you who have maybe some small toddlers around, they ask a ton of questions. And boy, you know, they ask some pretty good questions every once in a while. Especially this time of year, holiday season, you know, they're curious about different things. You take them shopping and hey, why does it work this way, or how does that work, you know? And you keep you take this information, you know, I have a slip and fall that occurred on the floor out here. Somebody walked through an oil puddle, if you will, or there's an oil puddle out there. Well, why is the oil there? How did it get there? Okay. Well, come to find out, we had a vendor came through, moved a piece of equipment, and there was a leak. All right. Well, first of all, why is the vendor coming through this way? Was that the right thing to do? So why did he do it? You know, and keep going down the path to try to determine the root causes. So it's a why. And I'm also a believer that there is no wrong or bad question that you can ask. You know, in our profession, we ask a ton of questions. Now, I'm getting this look like, oh, really? Okay. People will challenge you, yes, but think about this. Try to get to the root cause. Step 6, planning for your prevention activities. So the idea here is to treat the cause, not the symptom. If you dig deep enough, you'll get to the cause. What are the corrective actions we should be putting in place to eliminate or at least reduce? So we talk about risk reduction in the safety world there. When you look at controls, you can break it out really into 3 different sections. The hierarchy of safety controls. First of all, is it an engineering control we need to put in place to eliminate or isolate the risk? Those tend to be the most effective. Versus administrative controls, training, signs, rules, warnings, all the things that you've got out there already. And then PPE is really our last line of defense. But I would also say to corrective actions, it's not usually one single corrective action that's going to resolve our issue. It's probably going to be a culmination of different things to really remedy what we're seeing out there. So you need to assign responsibility for the plan, set your target dates, you know, be realistic. If things need to be modified, go and make those adjustments. And look at ways where you can measure progress in the process and those outcomes. So completing the report, you describe what happened, you include only the facts, although I think you have a section on one of your forms where you can kind of add some additional Statements, be complete, be specific. Describe why it happened and include all the things that you've learned about contributing factors. Is there something related to our work process? In other words, the shortcut, hey, here's the way it's described on paper how we need to do this, but here's the way it happens in reality, and understanding why it gets done in a certain fashion. What was the behavior, equipment, the environment, and our management decisions? So identifying the root causes in the report. Be cautious, though, with your unsupported opinions. You're not placing blame. And then include your prevention activities, any other attachments. So if it's diagrams or pictures that get added, that helps complete the report. And think about this report going to somebody else who might not have full knowledge of your operation in all cases. You know, you want to paint that picture so that they can kind of visualize what that looks like. A little dated slide, but this does still hold true. When you look at, auditing investigations, there are many times where you don't get down to the root cause. And in some cases, there's no root cause identified and there's no solutions given and corrective actions. So in any organization, we can only get better at this. Common errors that we see, you state the apparent cause rather than the root cause. So, the report comes down to, well, I slipped on an oil spot on the floor. I washed my hands, I'm done. Well, again, backing up and trying to figure out how it got there. Or the cause is related to the outcome rather than the incident. We see this a lot. Something happens, well, the employer wasn't wearing their PPE. Okay, let's back up and find out what happened that we had this chemical spray release. Or you stop the investigation too soon. Take the time, go the extra mile to get down to really what's causing the issues. Now, there are some red flags, perhaps, that you might find as you go down this path. Things to be aware of. Not necessarily fraud, but things that just kind of beg the question. Not having the witnesses. Details are vague, little detail. Okay. The incidents that occur late on Friday or first thing Monday morning, we talk about this weekend warrior syndrome sometimes, or people who maybe have used all their vacation time, or hey, they want time off. You know your people well enough, I think. Employees on the job, for a short duration. Things don't get reported promptly. And the real red flag on this one is, your first notification is from the attorney. We have no knowledge of the incident at all. So more red flags. You get those statements. You get that information and things kind of contradict each other. Injuries occur maybe at the time of the announcements for things that, obviously we don't want to see. Cutbacks, layouts, shutdowns, or just after somebody's been laid off. Happens in an area where somebody shouldn't be. Now that should be a red flag. I think you'd be able to identify right away. What were you doing over in this area? Or it's not within the scope of their job. Perhaps they've been disciplined before. Okay. Again, just red flags to gather. But what can you do about fraud? Again, employees should know how to report injuries, incidents, make it a painless, seamless process for them. Understand we need to know about things immediately. We also would like to know about near misses. Okay? So we can just get better at our safety process. Employees should be informed, as I'm sure there are, about, they have rights under the workers' compensation program. And that the policy, company policy, is to investigate fraud. It's fraud, it's security, it's the organization. We want to maintain a viable organization going forward, so we won't stand for that. Notify the correct managers about the incident immediately. I don't know your full process, but I'm sure there's a chain of command that you follow. Conduct immediate and thorough investigations, noting possible red flags, and discuss them with the management team. Okay. Now, when it comes to prompt reporting, we certainly have to allow and should be allowing for immediate and proper medical care through the network providers. So directing care, your occupational health clinics are in the best position to understand what the job tasks are. They know what your people do. We were talking earlier about, physical job demands, so, they know what's going on there. But by doing so, prompt reporting, it allows us to kind of get that process moving quicker, early intervention, so, something as simple as a cut doesn't become more major, doesn't become an infection, so to speak. So reducing the recovery time, reducing confusion about care and possible attorney involvement, and there's some real cost savings here. Saves everyone money, including the injured employee. So allow for the investigation to be completed quickly and put those controls in place. Here's another fact here, reducing the lag time reporting. So what we typically want to see from an insurance perspective is getting those incidents reported within the first 72 hours. And you probably want to encourage people to get them in immediately, and probably no more than 24 hours. I'm not sure of your policy on that. But as you get that delay, that cost of the claim just escalates. So again, more money in your pocket if we kind of nip it in the bud and people understand that, hey, we want to take care of our people. So the Titanic, I think most of you are probably familiar with that. As it says here, the severity of incidents depends on how many contributing factors occur at the same time. So if you look on the left-hand side, before the Titanic hit the iceberg, what all went right? Very few things, right? Where if you look at the right side, there are a host of things that went wrong. Even going so far upstream that dealt with the design of the ship and the decisions that were made for things such as reducing the number of lifeboats that were on there. Had they made some better decisions, there would have been a lot more lives that could have been saved. And this event wouldn't have been as tragic as it was painted out to be. So how many unrelated incidents can be prevented by addressing similar root causes is what I have here. So that's the presentation, but I'd like to hear from you, what else kind of piques your interest from this process? And I see we have Jeff hovering in the doorway, and I think you probably even have a recent incident.
We can do a root cause.
Yeah, we can do a root cause if you want. If you guys want to kind of tackle this.
I brought a couple. Two are rear endings, and one's
Okay.
just hitting the concrete barrier.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want me to just go over it. And then
Sure.
So we had a van driver the other day coming down the access road. They had that right turn at the blind turn there. Said she slid and then slid into a concrete barrier. So that's the incident, was the accident. And then we want to go through root causes.
Okay. So I'm not familiar with this, but it's a turn, you said?
Yep.
Coming down a hill?
It's right on the access road.
Okay.
So coming from the plant to the north yard, coming to where we are,
Okay.
there's a blind right-hand turn. It's a 45-degree turn.
Okay.
So made the turn and just kept turning right and hit the concrete barrier with the van.
This was the incident I was talking about.
Okay, so you said you had mud,
Yes.
you had some skid marks, so to speak.
Right, so she said she slid into the barricade, which she turned this way but slid into that barricade. She would have slid that way, which threw a red flag up to me. Another thing is, if you notice in those pictures I took, there was mud leading up to it, and those tracks went straight into the barricade. There was no, skidding.
And these were ruts that she had made. They were fresh. They weren't there from
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And in talking to the individual, anything, hey, I just got distracted. I took my eyes off I was looking over here, nothing like that. So didn't glean any information from the interview process.
Red flag looked like she just woke up.
Okay.
Right.
In my opinion,
Was it at the beginning of the shift, or was it at the end of the shift
It was
where they'd worked
kind of,
along?
like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like
Yeah,
that?
it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
In the afternoon. Okay.
Yeah, we
about
started at 6.
8 hours in.
Okay. Any sunshine, from the environment? I
My
was
best-
blinded by something.
My best guess on it was, she either nodded off or she was distracted by her cell phone, just wouldn't
Okay. Something that she does on a routine basis has always made that turn successfully.
Yep.